Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Close of Business Tuesday, and we've got a whopper for you today. We've got three leaders from IPAA. Barry Russell is the CEO of IPAA. We've got Dan Naatz. He is the EVP of Government Relations and Political Affairs, and Mallori Miller, who is also a Vice President in Government Relations. We've done some pre-gaming, and I'll just say this is like Permian acreage. There's so many zones to everything that's going on at IPAA. They're seeing it all. And so let me just stop right here and say, Barry, Dan, and Mallori, it's fantastic to have you guys with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Well, we're excited. Well, let's get our juices flowing. Mike Bradley, what's on that screen today? What would you tell us about what's happening in the world?
Yeah, Maynard, mixed screen today. I'd say a couple things that the markets are going to be watching for over the next 3, 4, 5 days. I think the CPI on Thursday is going to be a big deal for people. I think most people expect it to come in pretty hot. And so there's going to be the issue of how's the Fed going to react to that. So that will be interesting. The DOE's tomorrow. It's going to be another draw, and so that should be supportive of crude. And I think what's catching a lot of attention today is natural gas. Natural gas is almost up to 320. It looks like, weather patterns are becoming more favorable for natural gas. And so I wanted to relay a few things on that. I mean, we're pretty constructive as a firm on natural gas, second half as well as in 22. But just a couple stats. About 4 or 5 months ago in October, you saw the net length, net spec length and crude natural gas get up to around 70,000 contracts long. Now it's about 87,000 contracts short. And so the reason I like that is because a lot of the net length has come out of the market. Gas prices are here. So you have a lot of firepower to basically take gas prices higher if people start to turn bullish. So I think it's an interesting setup. And so, right now I think things look really, really good for natural gas.
Mike, what's the over-under on the inflation number Thursday?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I don't know that right off the top of my head, but I think it's supposed to be coming in pretty hot. Colin may have a little an answer to that.
All right, Colin, you think about that. Think about the Vegas CPI betting. Matt Portillo, this is a huge week at TPH. We've got hotter than hell on Thursday. I know that's on your mind. What else you got for us today?
Yeah, Maynard, I'll add just a little bit more context on natural gas to give a little bit of flavor on how we're thinking about the commodity price here. We are approaching our summer price forecast of $3.25. What's really driving this is strong global LNG demand. And if you look at the global market in particular, European storage levels are running about 26% below the 5-year average. Pricing for LNG globally is extremely robust. So if you look at the UK or TTF price, it's around $9 an MCF right now. And out of Asia, we're closer to 10. So on a fundamental basis, gas is rallying on a combination of things that Mike mentioned. One, weather, but two, the backdrop here for demand is quite strong and the ARB is quite open on LNG. That being said, we don't expect a huge move up from here for the summer. We're still thinking 325. Where we see the next leg higher is probably coming in this winter. The curve is still underpriced in our view, and we continue to expect pricing to move towards 350. And then 2022 still looks quite cheap to us. It's about $3 an MCF at the moment. We're still expecting pricing to get back towards 325 to 350. Ultimately, we need to see some coal to gas switching, essentially killing off some gas demand to balance the market. So we remain constructive on the commodity. The equities have run a long ways. We think there's a little bit more room to run, but from the equity side of things, probably in the 7th or 8th inning of kind of the broader trade here. On Hotter than Hell, I wanted to share the upcoming conference. It's probably one of the more exciting conferences we've had in a long time. We have some great keynote speakers here. Mike Pompeo's presenting, Governor Abbott is presenting, and then we have a special guest at the end of the day, Bill Maher, also doing a 30-minute segment with Maynard. So that should be all quite exciting. In terms of the conference itself, it's really going to be about energy all the time. And so we're going to be talking about the traditional energy complex with upstream, midstream, and service companies doing presentations, as well as the new energy transition complex. And we'll be talking about things like carbon capture, sequestration, which we also have a conference coming up on July 13th, which will go into more depth there, but we've got a panel on that. We'll be talking about nuclear. We have some presenters from Cummins, for example, being able to talk about the energy transition complex as it relates to automotives and kind of the broader trends we're seeing on hydrogen. So this is really going to be a fully packed conference here, talking about everything that we think investors will be interested in. And quite frankly, we're quite excited about the event. Just for a little bit of context, we're approaching about 1,000 or so attendees. So if you haven't signed up, feel free to reach out to your TPH representative and we'll get you signed up. It is in person as well as virtual, so you can attend either in person or on a virtual basis. And we have about 60 companies presenting on a one-on-one basis.
That's fantastic, Matt. And for those of you watching this wondering if I'm your TPH representative, you're darn right I am. Okay, Colin Fenton, what do you got today?
Well, on that question about the expectation for May CPI, I think the consensus number is at 4.7% year over year. But remember, there are powerful base effects there. So really, the question is the sequential movement, April into May. And we already know from the ISM prices paid numbers that it's just going to be a monster number. So if you see 0.4, 0.5 be bested, if it's 6, 7, 8, that's a huge number. And then following up on the question of natural gas, if you look at the UK National Balancing Point, the FN1 futures contract, it's at 67.82 pence per therm, 67.82 pence per therm. And if it gets above 70, we really have not seen that except for a handful of times back to the summer of 2008. So we are knocking on the door of the highest UK gas prices. Looking over at the Netherlands, the TTF price is at 27.67 euros per megawatt hour. If that number gets above 30, we've only seen that in the summer of 2008. And then, as Matt said, when you look at the JKM price, it's back above 10. So everywhere around the world, we're seeing strengthening gas prices, and we would expect that to continue.
Okay, awesome, guys. Well, let's jump in with IPAA. This is, as I mentioned, it's a joy to have you guys, Barry and Dan and Mallory. And I think what we were struck by in the pregame and just, going to your website and looking at all the things that are happening at IPAA, your organization reflects everything good, bad, indifferent, maybe kind of, it's all showing up and it's right there for everybody to see. And so, Barry, why don't we kick it off with you and just talk about, you've been there for a while, you've seen a lot of things. You remember when the U.S. didn't produce so much oil and gas, that's for sure. But why don't you give us an intro of what it feels like in your seat these days?
Okay, sure. Well, well, for one, just in terms of the time, it's interesting to have been there when back in the old days, if you look at how the industry's evolved from when we had so many small producers. So at our meeting, we would have 2,000 producers back in the 80s. And then, of course, we see the move to publicly traded companies and larger companies and so forth, and where we are today. So, that has been quite a transition and an interesting vantage point for me. The other part of that is that I think that one of the most interesting things that we've done over the years is to get our members, the publicly traded members, that come up to New York and talk about what their portfolio mix looked like for the next year. So we would have 70 or 80 companies up there, like what you guys are doing, and hear from the leaders, onshore, offshore, gas, oil, the different trade-offs that they make. And it was, pretty fantastic. And we did that for about 25 years.
Barry, I'm having a flashback. That was that old, that was the conference. Was it at the Sheridan?
It was.
And everybody would go. So what, are you still inviting oil and gas companies to New York City, or did you, now we're doing it somewhere else?
Well, we stopped for a while. We stopped because of COVID and some other things. We're going to probably look at it again. One of the things that we've done is we've done the private capital meeting that we do down in Houston. And, this year we had JP Morgan involved with that, and Quantum and some other folks. So we're still looking at that side of it. And we're going to look at gearing up over the next year or two with getting back to what we call our OGIS meeting, Oil and Gas Investment Symposium. So that's been great. But in the meantime, we've sort of had our hands full in Washington. So we thought we ought to stay in Washington and do what we're doing today.
We're probably just all glad you guys are there, every day, talking to folks for us. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about just the total membership, Barry? How many individuals, how many companies, just so we have a sense of it?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you know, we're the upstream. We're the upstream part of the industry. We produce about 83% of the oil, about 90% of the natural gas. We have about 75 publicly traded companies on the larger side, and some of the larger members are Oxy, ConocoPhillips, and so forth, all the way down to our smaller members, which really make up the base of the IPAA membership. So we represent them also. And as common to all of them, they have, one profit center. So this is relevant as we get into tax policy. But that is, basically what the membership is. And we're pleased to have, basically the full spectrum of members in IPAA.
And I know that Dan and Mallori spend a lot of their time around, the government policy, all those aspects. Before we dive right into that, because that must be the dominant flavor, maybe just tell us, Barry, what are like the 3-4 key issues that you're most focused on, or where you find yourself spending the most time?
Right. Well, I think in terms of a broad overview, as you know, one of the things that's happening in Washington is we're moving from sort of the campaign mode to the governing mode. So one of our overarching things is to make sure that we have expert counsel on the different issues that we're looking at the highest level of both the Congress and the Biden White House. And we're lucky to have been successful at that. And I would say that, as we do that, it brings our perspective to things like tax, environment, FERC, banking, and federal lands policy. So all of it comes into play. And I must say that I don't know of any time over the last 40 years when it has been where their policy choices have been so important in terms of what's going on in Washington. So those are some of the specifics that we're looking at right now.
Are there ways, I think we all perceive, of course, that the current administration is less friendly to oil and gas, more friendly to other things. I guess that'd be a quick way to summarize it. But are there arguments that you find yourself making that are really resonating with the administration? I'll throw out one. We had the team from NOIA visited with us one day, and they were talking about how much progress they've made arguing about CO2 per barrel is so much less in the offshore, like it's just, it's the cleanest oil and gas, et cetera. Do you think people are recognizing U.S. oil and gas is the cleanest oil and gas? Like, what is resonating with people who are even though they're slightly oil and gas, what's resonating with them these days?
I think that for one thing, they've only been there a few months. So some of them don't really know that much about oil and gas. So we're educating them on sort of the intricacies of taxes. So I don't know if I could think of one thing that's resonating, but I do know that, for example, understanding our tax provisions, understanding the importance of both offshore and onshore federal lands, is something we spend a lot of time on. Looking for the first time at issues with the banking industry, where there's sort of this trend in Washington that we sort of get penalized. We saw this in COVID. Everybody could apply for COVID relief, but not fossil fuel companies. So we fought that. And the same thing is happening with tax policy, some of these other, but the banking especially, where we're seeing that, one of the most important things, as you know, for the industry is access to capital. And we're seeing that that's more and more a difficult run. So I would say, those are sort of general things. I think the other thing that we're fighting in sort of a general assumption is the idea of leave it in the ground, that somehow we would be better off if we didn't produce, fossil fuels. And, I think that we've spent a lot of time with experts that we know in the industry to kind of basically say, look, if you took all the greenhouse gases that come from the energy business, it's about 16% of the greenhouse gases globally. So you could shut everything down, and it really wouldn't do too much in terms of what they're trying to do in terms of lower carbon and lower emissions generally. So we talk about that, but I think an easier way to say that is they're looking at supply and not the demand side of things. So they want to shut down things in the United States. And then we know that, hey, if there's excess demand, and we know there will be over the next 30 years, then that the production is going to go to other countries, back to Russia, Saudi Arabia, and so forth, those kinds of things.
So I guess I'm curious. I may be guilty, Barry, here of asking the same question, but when you make the arguments of, hey, if we do all this, oil and gas prices are going to spike. Hey, if we do all this, our industry will be impacted by higher energy prices. That's bad for trade and jobs and so on and so forth. If we do all this, our national security, we're surrendering some of our autonomy, and we're, enhancing the balance sheets of countries that haven't historically been friendly to us. Like, as you go through all these things, or U.S. oil and gas is just cleaner and we're going to have to use it, and so on and so forth. Do you find that there's one versus the other where your average opponent of oil and gas says, aha, okay, now I'm listening, because you kind of got my juices flowing there?
Well, I think that's true up on the Hill. As we talk to, both sides of the aisle, and we talk about what it would mean in, say, New Mexico, Arizona, out west, if there is basically there's a pause or a continued pause on leasing. What would that mean in terms of revenues and what's done at the state level? I think they begin to see that. I think that on things like methane, that's one of the things that's important to us. Well, I guess the way that I would describe it is the things that I talked about are sort of overarching issues, but as we talk with them, we're trying to find common ground. And part of that is for us to make sure that we understand their needs. And, one of the things that they've made very clear is that they're using a whole government approach, a whole umbrella, and that umbrella is going to be climate change. And so we're trying to work within that constraint to see, like, for example, on methane from small producers. We want them to understand that, there hasn't been that much data on some of the things that they're talking about regulating, or a regulatory system. And so there are some things that we can work together on to shape the, some of the details that they're talking about on the environmental side.
See, Barry, you got us so fired up here. I've just got like all these questions. Either that or I've had too much coffee today. But I'm teasing you. But we'll get the other guys in here. But one other question. I think we all wonder: what does the what's the view when you have issues like California had issues, Texas had issues in terms of power and reliability and cost? And these are complicated issues, so it's not like you can just say, aha, this was exactly the problem, although there's some themes. Is that one resonating with people, that if you're a congressperson and your constituents, lose power, is that an increasing concern, or no, not so much?
Yeah, I think that you've seen this over the last 30 days. That this first came out to be sort of this aspirational plan, as we know. But then as different people have looked at the plan, they say, hey, what will this mean in terms of the cost to consumer? Most likely to mean prices going up. What will this mean in terms of the supply chain of what you're trying to do? We've seen on the supply chain issue that we saw it with pharmaceuticals during COVID. Now we're starting to see it with lithium and other rare earth minerals, that it's all produced in China. So they're starting to kind of think through these things, and I think that they're starting to see areas where it needs to be modified, I think, in some of the things that they're trying to do. So we're seeing that more and more again up on the Hill, where I just saw Senator Manchin, and we've dealt with his office quite a bit, has come out and he's starting to say, look, I'm not for this thing, I'm not for that thing. Just over the weekend, talked about the voting rights legislation, but also the infrastructure bill. So all of these things impact us because we're gonna go along. We have to understand that essentially we have a tie in the Senate, and over in the House there's about a 5-vote difference. So it's going to be very close. And, this is part of the process. And I think we're going to know a lot more, particularly over the next 3 months. So it's a very front-end loaded process. And you and I, Maynard, when we talked at other times, you said, what's my biggest nightmare? My biggest nightmare is they move ahead on something major without getting enough input from industry as to what the ramifications of that will be. So that's what we're trying very hard to do with policymakers up on the Hill and also with the White House.
Well, this is all just fascinating, Barry. Let me try to get Dan and Mallori in here, and then Colin, Matt, and Mike. I know you're all itching to get in here. But Dan, maybe we could start with you. Would you mind giving folks a sense of what you tend to do with your day, and what are the things that are like top of mind on your radar?
Sure. I handle the government relations for IPAA overall, which means we deal with the regulatory agencies, also Capitol Hill. So, and then we have a team. Mallori's one of the folks focusing on specific issues. So, kind of a holistic approach. We do both the regulatory agencies and the Capitol Hill. So we're trying to cover a lot of ground quickly with the elections and what's happened with the Biden administration.
Awesome. And Mallori, maybe same question for you.
Sure. So as Dan mentioned, I also work on the government relations team. I tend to focus more on our federal lands issues as well as ESA and our ESG program that we launched in the fall that we're very proud of. So, we really view our role, we're kind of a conduit of information between our member companies and members of Congress and the administration. So we want to make sure that our members of Congress and people who are making decisions in Washington have the best information possible, so we can get that from our member companies and really distill it down into kind of Washington speak. As Dan and I both worked on the Hill previous to being at IPAA, we kind of understand exactly how things need to be nuanced and just best received. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Okay, now, Mallori, you've really opened this is a fascinating topic. Washington speak, Washington buzzwords. Like, what is Washington speak? I think a lot of us, we kind of assume everybody behind closed doors is normal, and just when they come out and are on social media, they act kind of like they do. But I don't want to get you in trouble, but what's Washington speak? Because we all need to learn it, I guess.
Well, I think it's just something that kind of comes along with the territory after you've been here a while and kind of working on the Hill. I was a political science major in college. I went to Colorado State University, thought I knew everything, got on the Hill directly out of college and realized I knew nothing about the political process. So I think it's just interesting to be able to have that background and juxtapose it with our member companies who don't have that background but kind of need that voice to be able to carry their message through. We kind of know how the political system works. We know the process. We know the appropriations process and the committee process. And I think the IPAA team, we pride ourselves on really having key relationships with a lot of staff and members of Congress. So I think we're able to deliver the message well.
Barry, you mentioned an interesting topic that's come up quite a bit on COBT, which is methane emissions. And the industry has, I think, done a great job over the last couple of years of really trying to clamp down on methane emissions. What as an industry can we do to highlight, I think, one, data around this, because data is kind of questionable so far, and two, to help show that the U.S. is really starting to turn the corner on methane emissions in general, which seems to be a big part of the whole climate change conversation as a whole?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that, one of the things that we're doing is we're also trying to communicate with the other trade associations. A lot of people are working on this, but basically that's a constant theme of what we're saying. Look at the progress that's happened so far. Look at the voluntary changes that have been made. And that's accelerated over the last couple of years, especially, as Mallori said, through the ESG programs. And we're all for them. So we're that's a major part of what we're trying to do. The data part is, I think, of particular concern, because as I said, there are some of the policy that they're talking about there is no data for it, and there's no regulatory system for it designed. And that has to do with particularly some of our guys, the smaller, producers with smaller wells. There really isn't all that much information. And what the EPA, for example, has a tendency to use are broad generalizations where they take a well and then they figure out what they call emission factors, which is a generalization over everything. It's as if they decided they wanted to see the emissions from a car, and then they included all cars, all makes, all years, and they come up with a number. It's, you can use it for sort of macro calculations, but it's not very accurate. So part of what we've done with EPA is we support a lot of the both the state and federal regulation of methane, as long as they have the right data, and as long as we're trying to have our input to help them custom make smarter regulations that would apply to a smaller unit or a different basin, or be based on real-time measurement of emissions rather than estimates. So that's we're doing that. This is what we're doing around the clock up there. And it kind of gets back to the urgency of what I was talking about before. There's not a whole lot of time. We got the impression that a lot of these decisions are being made quickly, and we are, we're working on it around the clock, but we're also finding experts that we know in the industry, or outside of the industry too, in academic pursuits, to get some of that information into the policymakers, because they're moving quickly. We expect that a lot of these decisions could be made in the next 4 or 5 months. So anyway, so it's a good question.
This is a question for either Mallori or Dan, a jump ball question. Less than 3 months ago, both of Alaska's senators voted to confirm President Biden's choice to head the Department of the Interior. And there seemed to be at least implicit deal that the recent decision-making on ANWR would not be reversed. Well, sure enough, this week, the recent permits or rights to compete for leases in ANWR were reversed by the Interior Department. I realize that might be a little bit of a charged question, but can you at least maybe give us a little bit of understanding of what happened there and what it means?
Yeah, Mallori, I'll take it and you can jump in. I think Colin's a great question about, beyond even the Alaska delegation and what happened. And this is going back to what Maynard said. I think really what we're seeing in the administration is two things. And I've talked to people about this. We are talking to the administration. We're hitting them with facts. And it's this real battle that's going on between what I'll call the true believers, who it's climate change all the time. And the president talked about that. And the folks that are trying to now understand they've got to run the government. They've got to run the economy. You talk about everything that's happening. And the same thing is reflected, I think, on Capitol Hill, which is we run into a lot of folks. Again, we will talk to anybody, but you're talking to Democrats. Some of them will tell Mallori and I right to our face, I don't care what happens. I want oil and gas out as quickly as possible, even from some folks that have production in their states. And so there are other reasonable people. And so much of what we talk about at IPAA is to have a real discussion about American energy and the world energy picture. And again, I go back to Maynard's question. There is a reality. There are folks that understand, look, we're going to have oil and gas for a long time. How do we do that? How do we address what Matt's question was, methane? How do we do this? Tax policy? All of these things are important. And then there is a significant group on the progressive side who say, I don't care. I just want it done. And I want you out of here as soon as possible. And some of our members, quite honestly, Colin, don't believe us when we say that there's a portion of the Democratic caucus who just simply doesn't care. They are beyond true believers. They just want to get oil and gas out. So how Senator Sullivan and Senator Murkowski, what they thought was going to happen, but there's an example, I think, where you can see the administration made a decision on a high-profile issue. Didn't matter if they voted for Holland or not, what was going to happen. I don't know, Mallori, if you have any more thoughts on that.
No, Dan, I think you answered it pretty well.
One thing, guys, when you listen to all this, it does seem like there are these kind of a couple of camps. There's the camp of like oil and gas, you guys are just off the team. There's just that view. And there's another view, which is, hey, let's be practical here. And that another view, which is a derivative of that, which is these oil and gas guys, when it comes to carbon capture, hydrogen, global energy supply, reliability, engineering talent, technology talent, capital, business people, like these cats are going to make a huge dent in this problem. Is that last one, that last group, sort of they're really concerned about the climate, but they're pro oil and gas. Is that group growing? Is that starting to really resonate?
I think so, because I think that that's sort of the key to everything that we're saying. One of the things that we think is the most important in all this is that our industry be at the table, and be more than at the table, be kind of in the details of some of these things that are done, because our industry was really the center of that innovation that you're talking about. And whether it's places like Oxy or ExxonMobil and others, there's a whole lot of interesting things that kind of, where the innovation is taking place. And there are probably 20 to 30 things that the government is looking at as they go from hydrocarbon more to hydrogen and more to some of these innovations on carbon management. And that's the part where we think that the industry can contribute a huge amount in terms of how they approach these things. So yes, we think that's growing. And we think that as they look at DOE and other places that are looking at this, more and more, the political people that didn't know about this to begin with are starting to kind of realize that's really the crux of what they need to do.
Why is there almost like a CO2 greenhouse gas budget? This year, we're going to spend blank. Current GHG emissions are blank. And by the end of the year, we hope that they're blank. And we're going to, therefore, reduce them. Like in a business, all the companies that Matt covers, that's how they have to think. Like, we have money, we have a goal. What was the return on the capital we spent on the goal? But it seems like there's a real resistance to actually look at the numbers and what we're spending to try to improve them. I know, Barry, I'm off on a rant here, but it's kind of that, where is cost benefit? Is it dead in Washington, D.C.?
I wouldn't say it's dead, but I think everybody's got a different perspective on it. So, for example, when I said before that in terms of our exports of oil and natural gas, we're exporting now to something like 50 different countries around the world. At the same time, China is doubling down and tripling down on coal. So China is not only doing that in China, they're basically laying the groundwork to increase coal production all over Asia, all over Africa, and parts of South America. So it's sort of like we're in this bubble doing one thing, which we understand, and it's for a purpose. We see the intended purpose. But on the other hand, when you look at it from a global perspective, it doesn't make much sense at all.
I'd love to follow up on Maynard's question around the industry being part of the solution. And as we look at the aviation market and kind of the potential for SAF to be a solution, that's very long dated. Looking at the diesel market and diesel consumption globally, it looks like that's going to be part of the consumption for fuel for a long period of time. So there's going to be a lot of carbon that we need to work out of the system. And the industry seems to potentially have on the horizon something that may actually be part of the solution to the overall problem with carbon, which is CCS. And so I'm curious, is there any policy underway that may support the industry? I know we've seen some Republican congressmen potentially propose an expansion to the 45Q program, or anything that you're thinking about around carbon legislation in general that may actually allow for the industry to grow into this in a profitable way and actually allow for sequestration of carbon to become a much bigger component of the upstream, midstream, and downstream business models, especially given all the infrastructure the U.S. has to potentially dispose of these molecules?
Yes, they have been. I'm going to shoot this over to Dan to give more details. But last year, basically Senator Barrasso and I believe Senator Carper worked together to pass a piece of legislation that basically was a lot of incentives for innovation, carbon management in various forms and so forth. And that was a great first step. And so those kinds of things make sense. Dan, I'll throw this over to you. You're, probably have more details in that, but in a general sense, at least from where I sit, that was a very positive move up on the Hill.
Yeah, I think again, Matt, it really depends, and I don't need to sound like a broken record. It depends on where you want to go and where the Democrats want to go. I think there's some very thoughtful legislation that Senator Brasso's put out, Senator Manchin, Senator Carper from Delaware, and Vicky Holub with Oxy actually testified in front of the committee and made a good pitch on that. Even Martin Heinrich from New Mexico. The challenge that we face is, and this is where the broken record comes in, there is a certain sector, and again, we can argue about how big it is, who simply do not want fossil fuel production to continue to happen. And so you can make the market approach. You can make the arguments about the economy, national security, the environment, that the air is cleaner than it's been in the last 20 years. But if you come at it from the approach of, look, I want you guys out of here as quickly as possible, you can talk about carbon capture all you want. The answer is all you're doing from that side is fostering this fossil fuel economy that I want to get away from as quickly as possible. And again, back to Colin's question, even on the ANWR issue, the same thing is happening in the Biden administration. That push and pull. Secretary Granholm's talked about it. And so if you look at it realistically about the impact on the world economy and what's happening, it's something we should definitely push. But to go to Mallory's thing, you get the Washington speak, which is, I tend to disagree a little bit with Barry. They don't care about markets. This is Washington, and it's a policy, and we're going to talk about climate change no matter what you want to do. So if you come at it from that approach, you can move anything you want. They're going to say no, because all it's doing is leaving fossil fuels in the ground. So anyways, that's my view.
I was just going to say, as a follow-up to that, is one of the things the industry has started to focus a bit more on is actually marketing some of the benefits of oil and gas development in the U.S. and talking about lower emissions. Would it also be helpful for the industry to be a bit more aggressive around messaging on carbon solutions, and that potentially filtering into that Washington speak that you've mentioned?
Mallory, go ahead. You can you've got a good perspective on that.
Well, I think that's something that we've tried to utilize with our ESG program. We launched our ESG program last fall, and it's something that Barry has been on top of for a number of years, but over the past couple of years, really kind of come to the forefront of things that our companies really need to focus on. So if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about our ESG program. We can kind of go from there. Our motto for it is ESG is for everyone. I think IPAA is uniquely positioned because we do have, as Barry mentioned, obviously some larger publicly held companies, but then we also have a lot of really small private cap companies. So the larger ones understand the benefit of ESG. They're starting to go through their portfolios and put together a comprehensive ESG plan. They're responsible to shareholders. They understand that. But for our smaller ones, it's been a little bit of a challenge, I guess, to get them to see the benefit of ESG. From our perspective, ESG is for everyone. And we do think that it's a great way for some of our smaller companies to kind of almost use it as a PR campaign for what their companies are doing. If you're privately held, you're not responsible to shareholders. It puts you in a different position. But I think because ESG is ill-defined at this moment, it actually plays to our advantage, that we can really, define it how we want and make it accessible for everyone. Our program, we kind of serve as a clearinghouse of information on our website. And we also have other partners that we've partnered with, FTI Consulting, NASDAQ has been a partner of ours for a number of years, as well as the University of Houston. So we are aiming to provide these resources for our member companies so that they can really craft their own individual ESG programs moving forward.
So, Mallory, one question, or really anybody, but I was thinking about the Hill, so to speak. I'm talking like I know what I'm talking about, but it always sounds like there are these really influential staffers, and they're these hotshot, super educated, youngish people, and these are the people doing the analysis, and then they're kind of putting the memos in front of the various Congress people. Those individuals, first of all, is that right? Is that constituency is the energy message, a balanced energy message, resonating with them? Are they more open, or are they more polarized? I have no idea, but I assume that's just a really important demographic.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I agree with you. I do think staffers are incredibly important when it comes to the Hill. My husband currently works on the Hill. He's with the Natural Resources Committee. I would say most staffers are younger. However, there are plenty of seasoned staffers who've been there for a long time. And I think that's really important to have that continuity because members of Congress come and go. And it's, they're focused on so many different areas. It's hard for them to really get invested and knowledgeable on specific issues. So, yeah, I do think it's important.
Well, I guess part of why I ask is it just seems like we kind of as an industry have a young people problem. They just, particularly young people who didn't grow up around energy, much less oil and gas. So do you think that's true? And how do we solve that?
I do think it's true, but I think there are young people like myself and others who work on the Hill who have a vested interest in this. I came to the Hill not knowing anything about energy policy. I thought I would kind of do something else. I actually thought I would be in military policy for a while. But my boss was on the Natural Resources Committee, and I started learning about oil and gas development from there and became really interested in it. I just thought it was fascinating and just so crucial to our economy in the West that, I think it's that's part of my job now, and Dan's job and our government relations team is to make sure that we really target staff members. And hopefully if we do our job right, we can get them to understand our perspective, the importance of oil and gas to the economy, especially in the West when it comes to federal lands, which I work on. And, just hopefully help them understand how important it is to their state budgets, to the economy in general, and just have a passion for it as well.
I would just add to that, through our foundation, we do a lot of education work. We've been around for about 12 years. And I think that there are something like 7,000 students have taken part in our program. And part of that is an externship program, a scholarship program. But it's kind of what I'm sure that you guys experienced. If you are around the industry very much, most people that have grown up in the industry love it. They love the people. I think it's a fantastic industry. And we started off thinking if we could get students in high school, now we're down to the junior high school level, come into a consulting company or an oil company or an oil services company and see what that's like. That would be something that they could build on, and they have. So they have, they can get to see what it would be like to be a producer or a landman, a geologist, and so forth. And we're very proud of that program. So we're trying to address what you're talking about.
It feels like we need a national student exchange program, and all the red kids have to go live in blue states for a while, and all the blue kids have to go live in red states for a while, and everybody's getting a little too comfy in their own little spot. Okay, Barry, I got to draw on your history. I think I saw the Total CEO, I think it was Total, but one of those European executives says we're woefully underinvesting in oil and gas. We could be 10 million barrels short in 2025. Rosneft, I believe, just made a public comment that the world is risking an oil and gas shortage. I could go on and on. When oil hits $100, are we going to get a windfall profits tax because, somehow it's our industry's fault? Like, aren't we setting up for a train wreck here in terms of cost of oil?
Because first of all, we're not allowed to use that terminology in the office, but because it brings back a lot of bad memories.
I don't want you to have a flashback, Barry. I'm sorry.
I was there during those years and worked on the litigation that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And as a matter of fact, Gail Norton, who used to be the Secretary of Interior, wrote the brief on that case. But yeah, I think that we don't have to wait that long. I think that we know that most likely prices are going to go up through the summer. And what you're going to hear is, my gosh, there's some kind of collusion going on in the oil and gas industry. There ought to be an investigation over these high prices and so forth and so on. Investigations will be started and then nothing will come of that. So that's sort of the standard operating procedure. But yeah, when you have that perspective, you get a lot of bad policy as a result of, people that aren't that familiar with the industry, I'm sorry to say. But, again, we're hoping that they're not going to go there. But thanks for those wonderful memories.
I'm sorry, Barry.
I'll just jump in there real quickly because Barry hit on it. Again, I think it's really important that policies have consequences. And that sounds so obvious, but the markets are watching everything that's happening in the administration. And so when you take policies that restrict access to oil and natural gas or the ability for American producers to be part of that world market, it's going to have consequences. And that's not a gotcha. That's just a reality of what I talked about at the beginning of having a realistic discussion about energy policy in the United States.
Well, we're going to have a offsite. We're going to get some fancy place and invite all the staffers across all of DC of any persuasion. And we're going to have energy climate love in and just talk about all the issues. And it's going to be incredible. And Colin's going to lead it and Matt's going to present stuff. And then Mike's taking everybody out for drinks. I think we got this thing solved.
Sounds great.
Mike says yes.
I like your idea. The Blues have to go to the Reds and the Reds have to go live with the Blues for a while. That's what I think would be good for the whole country.
Well, I lived in Brooklyn for a while, and as an oil and gas guy living in Brooklyn, I felt exotic. I was like a really interesting, like people looked at me like, wow. Colin, let me give you the last question. We're getting short on time. This has been fantastic, guys, but let me give it to you, CF.
Well, I don't really have a question. I guess maybe just an observation. And that is, up till now, we've had the architecture of language sort of allow people to drift. But it feels like we've drifted so far that we're going to hit those consequences that Dan's talking about. And so I do wonder if, that is what lies immediately ahead. And then we all know the finger pointing that happens and the rest of it. So, I would just encourage all of us to maybe keep a sense of humor and, listen to people who disagree with us, ask them why, they think the things that they think. If it were true that there's no place for oil and gas in the world, then why do people who don't necessarily have to be involved with it still want to be involved with it? Why wouldn't they just all become solar and wind people? There are logical questions you can ask where arguments just disintegrate. They can't be true. And, when we read some of the documents that have come out of the IEA and others more recently, and I've made this point in other contexts, when you read those documents, I'll give you one specific statistic. The net zero report that came out of the IEA projects that we're still going to need 168 billion cubic feet of natural gas in the year 2050 in the most extreme anti-oil and gas scenario. And I realize that most people have no idea what 169 BCF per day is. But in 2019, it was larger than the combined consumption of the United States, the European Union, and China. So, if you listen and you understand those words and the language being deployed, I think maybe you begin to hit the pause button and say, hey, wait a minute, an impartial, objective response here would start asking questions about that do not fit with some of these blind prescriptions against oil and gas development.
Yeah, that's true. And the reason people don't know it is that particular conclusion didn't make the headline. on that IEA.
Well, and in fact, it's in direct conflict with the headline that did come out, which is no investment is necessary. So walk me through the math and science. Let's call upon science of decline rates, how you can have no investment. 30 years in the future, you have larger demand than those regions I just gave. It's literally gibberish. It does not make sense from any geophysics or engineering perspective. But you have to actually know what you're talking about to see it. Oh, and you actually have to read the report, which almost nobody does.
Right.
So, we are heading towards whatever is the term of art we want to use. Let's call it a lesson, an experiential thing that's about to happen that would probably be best to avoid if we could.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I had the opposite experience that you did in Brooklyn. After being in Washington for a long time, I went down to Midland and I thought I was in heaven. I just walked down the street. Everybody was my friend. Nobody threw anything at me. It was fantastic.
Well, I would agree. Midland is pretty close to heaven. Well, look, I think Colin gave us some good bullet points to wrap up on. We all need to love energy, love the planet, and have a sense of humor. So, Mallory, let's go ahead and start the planning. But seriously, we really appreciate all you guys are doing to improve the debate, make the discussion smarter, more thoughtful, and just ultimately help the policy making. And so, God bless you, I think is a great way to end this discussion. I don't know if I'm empowered to say that, but seriously.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, and if you guys need any help, analysis, reports, anything at all, you want Colin to testify on Capitol Hill, or Mike, anybody, not me or Matt, but I'm just joking. But seriously, anything you guys need, you got it.
We'll call you.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Mallory. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you guys.